Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today we have a really interesting guest and a lively conversation, I guarantee you. We're going to talk today with Willem Hendrickx. And Willem, you've not always taken the easy route in your career, which has been on the sales side, and you're currently a chief revenue officer and had many, many global positions. One of the favorite parts of the story about you and I, when we were talking about your background, is at one point you were, within a year and a half, you were the sixth country manager. And you actually came in and gave everybody t-shirts that say number 6. And it's basically, if I'm not here in a little bit, at least there's something I left behind for you.
Actually, I signed all my letters in the beginning with number 6 to all employees.
I love it. But the big point of that is that it leads into what we're going to be talking about today. And people and culture are huge. Customer is huge. And we're going to talk about a customer-led advantage, right? And how do we actually create reliable, predictable growth engines? We're all here to help scale our businesses, right? And so you're very focused on the people on both sides, internally and externally. But what I would love to do is I would love to have you, maybe if you wouldn't mind, just take a minute or two here and explain a little bit more about your background before we dig in.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Steve, right? So basically, Willem Hendrickx, I'm actually Belgian from origin. I've been working for small companies, always in sales and large companies. I ran global channels for EMC. I ran Alcatel Lucent business, which was about 4 billion. I had my own company, worked with smaller companies as well. I went into telco. I went into, blockchain, and now I do cybersecurity, building my own cloud. So, a lot of different things, Steve, but that's because of my curiosity, I guess, and also learning. And I think, when you do that and you take different steps and you try to work with different people, you also get a better human being.
Well, I have to tell you, I run another podcast that's in the HR and talent acquisition industry. And so we spend a lot of time, talking about culture. And culture can be one of those things in terms of growth. It could be one of those things like mission, values, culture. It can be a page on the website. It can be a plaque on the wall, right? Why is it so much more important to you? When you think about creating a culture, and obviously you came into a culture at that point in your career was very toxic, right? You're the 5th leader of that country and, or 6th leader in a year and a half. Talk about upheaval, right? And Matt, you mentioned, what was your customer satisfaction score at that point?
Below 30, also employee satisfaction was, of course, what do you expect, right, when that happens. But the good news is the only way you can go up, right? So you just do that. But no, I think it's, for me, super important, right? Because I think it's all about that. If you hire the right folks who have the same passion and you show them, why you're doing something with regards to a strategy and everyone gets aligned to it, then it's the nicest thing that you can have. But if you hire someone wrong, it's very toxic, to your point, right? So, if you have a huge organization, you need to make sure that, in my view, you hire great people, but it's not only on the management suite, right? The first thing that you need to do is, of course, assess your leadership style and your leadership and make some changes if that's needed. But always think that your first line management is the most crucial part of every single company, because they define the strategy, because they define the culture, because they are the ones that are in touch with the customer. They are the ones that are hiring the people. And so when they are really, really good, the company normally does really well. And then the third thing for me is that, you need to make sure you bring some younger people into the organization who are passionate, who are, driven, because that always balances certain things. So I think I would say when you hire, try to hire in 3 levels: your leadership, your first line management, and bring some young people to the organization to change the culture that you currently have for the better.
So I want to dive into that just a little bit more, because in your positions and where you are today, you don't have time to do things that aren't going to contribute to the bottom line. You're accountable to a board, and I guarantee you one of the first things on the agenda in your board meetings is like, how's this quarter's quota doing? And how's the next quarter's, right? So, you've got to be ruthless about how you prioritize where you spend time and resources, and how you build that culture and how important that is. So there's the people, the culture you just talked about. We all know high performance teams that's why VCs and PE companies, they invest in people first and the idea second, because no matter what, we need that high performance team. So this focus on the people. I love that. You have an internal and an external focus, and you talk a lot about customer-led advantage. And I just wanted to, what is your philosophy on that? What does that mean to you?
I mean, the customer should be in the center of gravity, right, Steve? I mean, the customer is the one that pays the bill. The customer is the one that defines your overall strategy. So you need to make sure that you're very clear about putting that customer straight. If you want to grow, I always say that you win through evidence, not not adjectives. Customers, I think there are a couple of things. First, it's really important that you have the right customer, right? I mean, narrow your ICP, because you can also have customers who drag you down, where basically you need to do so much from the engineering work that is not repeatable, and that is not a good thing. So, work with the customers who truly feel the pain, right? And so that you can make that repeatable. That's number one. But the second thing, which we should not forget, is operationalize the value. When you do that, making sure there's continuously value so that they're happy. And then if you do that, you can actually turn champions into megaphones, right? That's the soul, when they are really going out by themselves and talking to peers to say, this is the best. That's actually the way you need to run it. That's the perfect scenario. Now, it's not always the case, but you need to push it. So when you come to the sales team, or even my channel team, or the channel organization outside, I think it's very, very crucial that you build use cases based upon those customers, that you force prospects to talk to those customers, and that they can actually deliver the message that you want to deliver and show the value what you have been created for them, which is repeatable. And the reality is, and I learned that through my BTC times, you need to make sure that when you're talking to a bank, that you have a story of a bank, and that you have a regional customer, that you have a regional success story, right? It needs to resonate, of course, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. But that's, for me, it's all about the customer. And if you do this right, you will scale accordingly.
So let me ask you this, because I want to get to the go-to-market. I want to get to ICP, but you said so many interesting things in there that I want to ask some questions about. You started out and you said this. You said the customer defines our strategy. And it was an interesting way to put it, because we all got to be C-suite executives in our companies, not because we weren't intelligent, right? We know how to make decisions. We can make decisions on our own. We can, in fact, McKinsey had a big study, and they're like, only truly 15% of companies are customer led and actually execute on the voice of the customer. The very first sentence you started out that the answer to the question there on what is customer led advantage was that the customer defines our strategy. Tell me more about that.
I mean, at the end of the day, you create a product for someone to buy, right? And so if that particular customer, and you narrow your ICP in a way that is really clear, then of course it's the customer that defines how you're going to go to market, how you deliver the solution, how you maintain the value through the cycle so you can make it repeatable. I think a lot of companies are too much focused internally. There's too much internal stuff happening. And sometimes we forget that we need to talk to our customer about, A, are you happy? B, what is the roadmap? What do you need to do so you can improve yourself, every single time, but also change your go-to-market effectively as well. And it also means that sometimes making hard choices, right? Because if the right customer is the right customer, it also means sometimes you don't have the right customer. And then what do you do with those not right customers? And are you going to continue to gain the non-right customers? Because if you do that, it drags you down. It not helps you moving forward. So again, when I'm talking about the strategy, it needs to be around the customer. It needs to be very, very clear. It needs to be on the right customers where you as a company can give the most value to.
These seem like basic questions, right? But they really aren't. Like, how do you know who your right customer is? Like defining that ICP, because you just brought something up. It's very easy to say, here's our ICP, but I got this deal and this deal that we can bring in, right? And it's revenue we can bring in, and I could hit my numbers and, but you talked about it, it's like they can drag the business down, right? If we're not set up to handle a customer that isn't really defined as our core ICP, then we waste time, we waste resources, right? They're the ones that are going to churn the fastest, and expanding customer revenue is the number one way we're supposed to grow our businesses. So what's your point of view, and how do we define that ICP? Really define it?
Well, you define it by data, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you look at data, and you need to do it continuously. But I mean, if you look who is buying, what, to your point, in which kind of segment it is it a vertical segment or a customer segment? B, which are the customers who are buying the multi-products if you sell multi-products? What is your overall cost of sale in that particular segment? So you look at that particular data, and when you narrow it down like that, you got to a pretty good conclusion. And then you also, which is important, you talk to those customers to see, okay, is the value realization there? And this is not easy because, to your point, every single rep, but all of the rest of the company sometimes too. Oh, but there's another thing that we can go after, which is also important. And that's true, but it basically reduces opportunity and it drags everyone down. Because think about it, right? If you're very clear and narrow about what your scope needs to be. Now, again, that scope can be, very flexible depending on which product you sell. But it's way more easier to create a package for your sales guys to go after. It's also way more easier for marketing to have the right messaging. It's way more easier for engineering to deliver the right product. So it's an end to end that you make things better. And if you don't do that, you drag the whole company with you. Don't forget that. One deal can also basically look good at paper, but it might drag the whole company because we have to create a new feature and the other customers have to wait on all of the other features that we promised. You need to, there's sometimes marketing says, this is really cool. Maybe we should make it a repeatable, which is not the case. So just be hard on it, but that's not easy. It's not easy. And walk away from deals. I mean, not easy for a rep to say, walk away from deals, qualify the hell out of it because, and the smaller you are, Steve, the more you even have to do that. I learned that. If you're a large company, you can afford that. If you're a very small company, you need to be way more tougher in your choices.
That's really good because when you're smaller is when you're most susceptible to that, right? And the majority of companies, like a lot of the audience here, right? We're in the middle. It's like the really large enterprise companies, the startup companies, the large part here. We might be a company that's 100, 200, 300, 400 people, right? And you're defining growth, you're defining the next level. And it's so tempting. It's so tempting to take in the deals, to fill the pipeline, to close, to meet the expectations that we're constantly pushed in a direction that keeps us from staying on the course. It's easier to do that, right? How do you stay on course?
It's hard, right? But I think, in my opinion, and everyone makes mistakes on it, right? And we have done as well. But, I think it's all about giving clarity to the organization on where you're going to focus yourself on and stick to it. And it basically also means that, when you look at the different divisions need to have the same KPIs or the alignment of the KPIs need to be the same. Because if you don't have that, then you have an issue, because if, for example, marketing, it doesn't matter where the leads are coming from, the large company or small company, while we decided the mid-sized companies is our ICP. I mean, we have a problem here. So you need to make sure that you have a full alignment. And then the other thing is, if you want to scale, you need to make sure there's accountability in the system for each division to do what they need to do. And then there's how you stick to it. And then don't forget, everything is about success, right? So when you basically win those particular deals in that ICP and you show them, man, this is another great deal with multi-products that you can sell, celebrate those particular deals because, again, it shows that this is the right trajectory, this is the right strategy. And so, but sometimes it's, everyone has picked up a deal that is outside of the ICP because, end of the quarter, you need to do it. So everyone is doing that, but then you need to qualify that as well to make sure that you're not diluting from it.
What you've done is you painted this really vivid picture because you talked about marketing and sales and product and customer success and the consistency of messaging internally. So I just recorded a podcast yesterday and we spent probably 80% of the time talking about how we're really good at messaging outside of our company, but we're typically really bad at messaging inside our company, right? And staying in alignment inside of our company. And the more that we stray away from our ICP, the more, and we didn't even get into this in this 80% of the conversation yesterday, but here's what I'm getting from you. It's the harder and harder it is to keep alignment internally and message internally and have everybody know what we're doing and what our mission is, right? What's right, what's wrong, and are we consistent if we're not consistent in the customers that we bring in?
It's very easy when everything goes well. It's not easy. We miss a quarter and you say, guys, we need to stick together too because it's the right thing to do. It's the same with it's not only with the customer side, it's also with the partner, strategy, right? The partner strategy is not built for a quarter. You don't make a business plan with a partner for a quarter. You do it for the long run. And so it's super important that everyone is aligned, that you're not here to do a quarter, you're aligned to run a business. And the board needs to understand that as well, that, in the long run, this will be better. And yeah, but you need to be strong about it. It's not always easy to be clear. Not always.
So one of the things that you had said in an earlier conversation we had is that, and you brought it up here, you want to have your customers be a megaphone for you. But a lot of us were hesitant to actually push that and be proactive and have people actually talk to our customers because we're always worried, okay, well, what are they going to say, right? Even the best relationships, you just that kind of like it feels like less control. But you've brought it up here, you brought it up before, the opportunity for the customer megaphone. And what's your recommendation on that? Like, because we tend to be hesitant, right?
I mean, here's a good thing, right? A lot of prospects right now are asking for reference calls, so it makes it already easier, but it should be part of your playbook, in my opinion, right? And then even you say, here's a couple of references that you can call Mr. Customer or Mr. Prospect, right? I mean, maybe if they'd even call, but just that you give that to them, provides you the trust that is needed. That's one side. The second side, which in my opinion is so interesting. Every time on a rep side, we were often tend not to talk to our customer about, give me other names of people that I can call on your behalf on, right? Because I mean, again, most of those, if it's a CISO or a CIO and you ask them like, hey, do we have anyone else in my area that I can call to, which you recommend? It's a very important question, for two reasons. One, if he says yes, then he basically, that he's super happy about your product and what you do. If he says no, then there's okay, then you have to dig in a little bit deeper. Either he doesn't want to be a reference, he's just not part of the culture of the company, or there's a problem, and then there at least and you can fix it. So I just think you need to be really proactive with all your customers about it and ask them to speak at an event or whatever. And good customers tend to do that. It's a partnership. At the end of the day, you need to create a partnership with your customer, a trusted relationship. It takes time for the partner, for the customer, but also for us. But you have to spend time with them to make sure that you earn the trust of them. That's what it's all about.
So let's dig into that a little bit. There was a gentleman, a 4-time B2B CRO, that was on the podcast about a month ago. And he said, Steve, we all have to spend time with our customers. Right. And so we were talking about that. And he said, I got to stop. And he said, and this isn't inside of a sales conversation. He said, this is outside of a sales conversation. Like, how would you reflect on that? Like, you just started talking about how important it is to talk with customers.
It's true, right? I mean, again, I think you can have like, for example, I'll give you an example. You can have two types of product management. You can have a product management that is very much internally focused, or product management on the road all the time and talking to the customer, understanding what they need to go back to engineering and say, this is what I need to develop. So he's right. I mean, in that regard, you should. I also think marketing should talk to customers to say, hey, what is your need? Talking about, the more you talk to the customer about how they are using your product, the better it is, the better you will become as an organization, and also allows you to get internal alignment, because when you talk about the need of the customer, all of those other functions understand that because they have been talking with customers as well. So he's spot on. Now, again, that's not a DNA thing sometimes, as you know. Sales are tending to talk to customers more than other functions, but it's definitely something that you need to try to push. And this is also why I think in the leadership teams, we need to make sure that everyone feels comfortable talking to customers. I think it's super important, right? And it's not always easy, but everyone needs to do a little bit of an effort on it. And that's why you can actually start with, for example, executive relationships that everyone owns. So every exec on the CEO suite owns like 10 relationships as an exec. These kind of things helps to cultivate that kind of culture, but it also helps both the customer, but also the different divisions to understand what's really going on and take an ownership as well. It can't only be sales. It cannot be.
So that begs another question, which is because you've clearly defined how important the customer is, defines our overall strategy, right? How do we go to market and how every department operates? Who owns the voice of the customer? It's so important. Who owns it?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think it's everyone, right? At one moment in time with Vectra, I had a person reporting to me and he called himself the voice of the customer because I wanted him to be the liaison between engineering and everyone. So it's like, hey, he represented the field, he represented the customer, making sure that all of the, I would say, recommendations or things were streamlined so we can talk collectively as a group about what is really meant as for the customer. And I really like that because it basically streamlines everything. And because it's easy to say everyone owns it, but you know as well as I do, when you say that nobody's accountable.
That's why I asked the question, right? Like you've spent time in B2C and B2B. B2C companies have titles like chief customer officer, right? Or chief experience officer, right? There's a defined role in there. And one thing that we've been forced to learn is that there's more and more and more and more B2C expectations that are being put onto our B2B relationships, right?
This idea that every organization has a chief customer officer, right, from a certain size, and that's great. And I think this is really, really important. And I think, you know, again, this comes back about the value realization. This comes back on making sure that, you know, when the customer buys, it's clearly what the pain point is, what are we solving for, and through the cycle, can we make sure we keep on having that proof? And so, 100% like a super important function. If this is the voice of the customer, that could be. I just think that also from a CRO perspective, I feel that I'm responsible for the voice of the customer. I'm sure that, you know, the engineering says, oh no, I'm also responsible for the voice of the customer. Marketing will say. So I think we need to own that collectively in that regards. That is my philosophy around it. But definitely, you know, a chief customer officer is super critical to making sure that all of the post-sales activities are done in the right way and the customer is healthy and happy.
I love your what you talked about is at least having someone, right, where they're actual put in their title or whatever, but that is there to collect the voice of the customer and interpret and coordinate internally between all the different departments. Because right now we don't really have that. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons that McKinsey study that said less than 15% of companies actually execute on a voice of the customer. Because if we just kind of all have it in our heads, we know it's important, but we haven't operationalized voice of the customer into our go to market and really made it, be very diligent about that, then we're just leaving opportunity on the table.
I 100% agree with that. So that's why I said, like, you know, when we had someone like that in that particular role, and that was great because, again, it's a collecting of data, collecting of information. And then it's not about only that, it's to making sure that that person is also respected, you know, across a different organization, knows what he's talking about. So we can collectively think about what is needed. It's more the voice of the customer, more has to do with the roadmap, in my opinion, a lot of times. But at the same token, you can also use the voice of the customer for messaging and everything else, right? So I think you're right.
I see this a lot on this podcast. Like, there's not a company out there that says, no, we're not customer obsessed. We're not customer first, right? We all are. But it really is to the degree that we execute on that.
Yeah, but again, it's like with everything else, right? Words don't mean anything until you act, and that goes into come back to the culture, right? I mean, there's a problem. Listen, every product has a problem. It's the way you, when there's a problem, how do you act towards that customer? Do you pick up the phone on the weekend? You know, can you call them to say, hey, we're going to solve it and be there with responsiveness? And I think that's the same. If you bring that culture to the organization, I think you're good. But that's not easy. It comes back to people having the same philosophy and mantra to make sure that they understand if we do right with the customer, we can scale this business moving forward.
I want to make sure we've gone down some really cool, lines of conversation here, but I want to make sure that of everything that we've talked about here, or maybe something we haven't talked about yet, but if you could say, hey, for everyone listening here, all the C-suite executives, VPs and sales, marketing, customer success, if there's one thing that you would want them to take away from our conversation, what would that one thing be?
I think the one thing would be that, you know, again, make sure, in my opinion, and probably a lot of people do that, you know, that you have as well an external as an internal communication on why things are important and overcomplicate internally about, you know, the overall obsessiveness and make sure that it sticks to everyone. I think that's for me the key area. The second area, again, what I'm going to say, Steve, it's people, because we can always say this is what we're going to do. But if certain people in the C-suite or other people are not doing it, then it drags you as a company down. And you need to make sure that you hire the same caliber of people with the same culture that are obsessed about customers. And to your point, it's all about talking. But when shit hits the fan, the people are there and they are picking up the phone. And by the way, the customer have their mobile phone, so they can call them. I mean, that's what I call being there for customers.
I love it. I got to tell you, here's my one takeaway from everything here. Maybe it's an observation, not a takeaway. Every single thing that we've talked about here is 100% internally under our own control.
100%. Everything is internally and under you. That's always the case. It's always the case. Customers are always right. Don't forget that.
Yeah. But our focus on them, right? Our internal alignment, how we talk internally, how we set our own culture, how we hire, right? Everything that you've talked about here today has nothing to do with, like, you think about like the traditional SWOT analysis or something like that. And what's going to keep us from scaling and growing? That was in the title, like most reliable growth engine, customer-led advantage. That was our title here today. We didn't talk about anything external. It was all internal.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think external is of course important because you have to have the drive the numbers, right? I mean, external is, you need to make sure that your internal setup in order to make sure you deliver the right message and stuff like that, right? Because again, what we didn't talk about is basically enabling, right? Enabling the sales folks and stuff like that to make sure that the pitch is right, that they can understand the pain of the customer, that they can deliver the value proposition to the customer and make a results. What we didn't discuss is the overall go-to-market strategy of how you scale a company, not only by hiring people, but how do you do that with an ecosystem of partners that it could be MSSPs, channel distribution, OEM partners, which is dear to my heart. Because again, I mean, if you look at the segmentation of a market, it could be that although it's not in your ICP, but it could be that you can actually serve a certain segment of the market through a certain other alliances that you create or other relationships that you build, right, on the channel side or the partner side. And that comes back to also, I think, you all first collect data, right? I'm a data junkie. And when you have the data, then you can put a strategy together and execute upon it.
We might need another podcast on that whole go-to-market plan, because you're right. That was a big part of what we wanted to talk about today. I would just love to say that the mission of this podcast is to bring C-suite perspectives, insights, experiences, point of views together so that we can all learn. And if we share and we do that and we learn from each other, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats, right? And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today, Willem. I just want to say thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. It was a pleasure. So thank you very much for having me.